Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, comrades and compañeros, and the comrades I can say today, because it is election day in New York City. And by the end of the evening, the polls close at 9 o'clock here. By the end of the evening, all the steakhouses will be turned into yoga studios. Everything that you like will be collectivized. We're all going to be working on the collective farm in the middle of Central Park. So it's all over, ladies and gentlemen. Now, come on, I'm not a doom monger about this stuff. I have said, and by the way, I'm Michael Moynihan. This is the Moynihan Report on the Two-Way Network. You know that. Why do I have to say it? But I will anyway. But this is what's happening today in New York City. We have elections, three important elections in New Jersey, Virginia, the governor's races there, and the mayoral race here in New York City, where I am in Soho right now. But polls close here at 9, 8 in New Jersey, 7 o'clock. They just closed in Virginia. You're going to get a Democratic victory there. You heard it here first. I mean, it seems like an easy prediction. Winsome Sears, probably not going to pull that one out. What does it mean for the parties? That's what we're going to discuss tonight. We're going to discuss the splits in all of these parties, what is happening in conservatism, and what is happening amongst our liberal friends. On the other show that I do, The Fifth Column, which you should be subscribe to that too. I mean, why not? There should be more of me in your life. We had John Lovett on yesterday, went up today, the Pod Save America guy, who, fascinating guy, by the way, super nice. I apologize for ever making fun of him in the past. So I told him that before we started, and turned out to be just an absolutely lovely guy, smart guy, funny guy. So yeah, that was a fun episode, but he had a lot to say about the party and didn't really want to say, oh, well, there's a split between the progressive wing and us more mainstream Obama types. But more on that soon. In about 20 minutes, we'll have Don Calloway. I'm excited to have Don. If you watch MSNBC or cable networks, you'll have seen Don, the Democratic strategist, and he is the CEO and founder of Pine Street Advisors. Am I remembering that right? Pine Street Advisors. He is a DC man. He is a liberal. He is a Democrat. And he's going to fill us in on what he thinks the future of his party is. But election day here, we'll get back to that, into Zohran Mamdani and his terror reign of Stalinism in the city. I'm kidding. I'm joking. Let's go. But more on that soon. But it is actually interesting today on election day. I had a number of moments on Instagram, because I act like a 17-year-old girl when I wake up in bed and I'm just scrolling through Instagram. And most of it is old Italian disco songs, to be honest. The Disco Bambino account is really something special. But on top of that, I was like a lot of friends that surprised me, New York City friends who were very enthusiastically voting for Zohran Mamdani. Didn't expect it. A lot of these people will have their tax bracket a little less generous than previously, but there's a groundswell of people. It ain't going to be Curtis Sliwa. Sorry, Curtis. We love Curtis because he's just funny, and he's a classic New York character. He has a New York accent. He got shot in the back of a cab by a Gambino. Like, how can you? That's like the best candidate of all time. But we don't vote for him, and no one's voting for him. Andrew Cuomo, who ran one of the worst campaigns in the history of campaigns. And it's not just because he was going to be a guest on the Fifth Column and he didn't show up, but that didn't help. Sorry, Andrew. Bad stuff. Okay, before we get to that, and we don't have the results yet. I think we kind of know them, with the exception of Jersey, which seems a bit more of a toss-up. Although I have my suspicions about that. I want to address a couple things. First, I wanted to talk briefly about somebody who died today. And it got really almost no coverage compared to his influence in American politics over the years. And that is the former vice president. Some people would say the former president. And at the time, if you're old enough, you would remember the former president, Dick Cheney, who was vice president. He passed away yesterday. Got that news this morning. And just to point out, it kind of goes to what we're going to talk about tonight. The differences in what our parties are 20, 30 years hence. I would say, 20 plus years after 9/11, Dick Cheney was the most consequential vice president of his, in anyone's generation. I'm trying to think of somebody who was even competitive. You could probably say Kamala Harris, considering, but it's a short span where she becomes the nominee and is forced to become the nominee, and her president was barely cognizant. So that was a slightly different thing. But the idea with Cheney, which I think probably isn't true, by the way, that he had an outsized influence on the George W. Bush presidency. He did have a big one, but I think it was overplayed. A lot of this stuff about Halliburton, the Vice movie, which, by the way, was always confusing when I worked at Vice, because I'd look up Vice stuff and the first thing that would come up would be this movie about Dick Cheney. That kind of myth of Dick Cheney is not even really being debated at the moment. Because Dick Cheney died, and I know it's an election day, but it's a governor's race in Virginia. It's a governor's race in New Jersey. It's a foregone conclusion conclusion mayoral race here in New York City. So kind of surprising to me how much we've forgotten that period. We've forgotten what 9/11 was. And I'll tell you one really repulsive thing that I saw today related to 9/11 and related to the race here in New York was someone who posted, a member of Congress who posted a video of a plane flying into the World Trade Center and had some comment about Zohran Mamdani. That stuff is beneath contempt. Come on now. Like, Mamdani is not only not my candidate, he is somebody that I think is a terrible candidate, will be terrible for the city. Every one of his policies kind of makes my skin crawl. But that kind of stuff is beneath a member of Congress, although the Overton window on what is acceptable has shifted so much that it's not surprising to me. But that stuff kind of disgusts me. But back to Dick Cheney, this is something that I was surprised. I want to put something up on the screen here. And I live in Brooklyn. I live in Bed-Stuy. And there's a guy named Chi Ossé, who's apparently, this is how much we pay attention to local politics here, my city council representative. And he posted something on Twitter this morning about the death of Dick Cheney. And I just wanted to put this up. This is a tweet from my city councilman, Chi Ossé. And that is, may he rest in piss. Now, not very clever now, is it? Chi Ossé, who was born in 1998, I discovered today, and his father was a very famous lawyer. I think he was Jay-Z's lawyer. He was kind of a hip-hop entrepreneur and was involved with Def Jam Records and everything. This kind of stuff, when we talk about planes flying into buildings and saying this about Zohran Mamdani, and then you have the former vice president, who, I disagreed with him at the time. He's somebody who has almost no impact on the Republican Party now because of his daughter, number one, who went after Donald Trump with zeal, and Dick Cheney himself, who said after January 6th that he wanted to have nothing to do with the Trump vision of the Republican Party. So nothing surprising there, but rest in piss, Dick Cheney, says this young guy who represents me in his 20s. I don't think I really have to elucidate how sort of unseemly this stuff is, and this sort of dehumanization of our enemies, particularly from somebody who has a close association with the Democratic Socialists. He has a very close association with Zohran Mamdani, and the number of people that they've made excuses for who are bad people, terrible dictatorships. Look on the DSA website, and the stuff that you will see when it comes to Hamas, Venezuela, Cuba, et cetera. You can agree or disagree with Dick Cheney and the Bush administration and their involvement in the Iraq War, which, as we know, had catastrophic results. But I think these young leaders should maybe take, if they're going to denounce Donald Trump and the language that comes from the White House, that perhaps they too should, lead by example here. I scrolled down for a few. But I'm just going to be honest now. This is just me being a jerk. But I scrolled down to Chi Ossé's Twitter feed, and this was the one that came up right after. And this is good luck to everyone running in the New York City Marathon today. It's now my annual fiduciary duty to remind you all that I ran the marathon. Okay, the man who represents me does not know what the word fiduciary means. Come on. These are these are our leaders. These are our young whippersnappers, the young upstarts, the young revolutionaries who believe it's his fiduciary, his financial duty to tell us that that was like literally 2 tweets down. I couldn't resist it. I'm sorry for being a dick, but I kind of had to do it. But I don't like this stuff. I'm surprised by how little of it there has been. On the Republican Party side, the Cheneys are a vestige of the kind of neocon past, of that Bush era of politics. And on the left and on the Democratic Party, they just don't want to remember somebody who they have a negative memory of. I mean, they would be kind of trotted out as the Republican Party under Donald Trump is so bad, but even the Cheneys loathe him. But now, pretty much nothing. So rest in peace to Dick Cheney. Didn't love his vice presidency. Have a lot of problems with him, but let's be decent people and not say that someone should rest in piss. That's not too much to ask. Okay, another thing I wanted to get to before we get to the local politics, well, just the politics of the day of these elections, is a lot of questions that I got asked. A lot of questions. I'm gonna take a drink of this. What was the one question I got asked the most in the past 3 days? Can you guess? Well, I got about 100 emails asking me about my appearance on Bill Maher with Marjorie Taylor Greene, MTG, the fantastic MTG, who, when you do shows like this, by the way, you're in a green room together, usually. But I tried desperately not to be in the green room at the same time as Marjorie Taylor Greene, because I knew something that always is true about politics, that you don't become a politician and become as successful as she has. And she's extraordinarily successful. And she's so busy that I know that she hadn't ever listened to any of the podcasts I've done in which I denounce her like every second word, just because we don't have the same politics. I mean, she's kind of Trumpy and then kind of a lefty on certain economic issues, which I'm not a big fan of. But I tried not to be in the same space as her before we went out, because I knew that I would like her. And that's what the producer said. You'll like her. She's a really nice person. And I'm like, yeah, but I got to go out there and I got to give her shit. And but I liked her. And she was a super nice person. And afterwards, we had a drink. And we had a drink with her boyfriend, who is that horrible OAN reporter who said that horrible thing to Zelensky about not wearing a suit and just attacked him. And I had a nice drink with him and with her and with Bill. What was said then will remain in confidence. I did say that this is indeed off the record. But she is a much more fascinating individual, and I'm going to criticize her here too. But I think the thing about Marjorie Taylor Greene is that she is a woman who entered politics after owning a construction business for a long time. We're the exact same age. She was born in 1974, as was I. She looks better than I do because, I do lots of drinking and smoking and such, and she's a fitness aficionado. So a compact little person. But one of the things that I realized about it is that she came to this political universe when, in the same way that I did, but I was 18 when I did it, and she was in her late 40s. Does that excuse things? Does that mean that's somebody who should be representing us in Congress? I have my reservations about that. But during the show, during the overtime segment, Bill asked about her comments about the Jewish space lasers. Everybody knows this. And she says, aha, I didn't say that. I didn't say that. She is correct. She did not say that. That was the shorthand from the media, but it wasn't dishonest to say that, because she said the Rothschilds space lasers. She looked at me in this exchange, and I talked to her about this afterwards. And she said, I honestly didn't know what the Rothschilds were. I didn't know that they were Jewish. Bill intervenes and says, it's clearly, this is like a byword for Jews, and anti-Semites use this. And she said, I didn't know, and I believe her. I've attacked her for this. I actually believe her. And it's a kind of a mean thing to say, is I believe her because she doesn't know very much. And she's learning as she's teaching. And I saw her today on The View. And God, I was wrong about 2 things. Don't listen to me about politics, because I was wrong about 2 things. We were sitting before we went out, and I said, the audience here can be very hostile. Be careful. They're going to be hostile. You become the wrestling villain, I become the good guy kind of thing. They introduced her rapturous applause in the studio at CBS in Los Angeles. She went on The View today. I said to her, watch out. You know what they want. They're going to come after you. These people are just like coiled snakes ready to go after you. And she said, oh, no, I know. I watched The View, clips of it today. I watched most of it. Good Lord, what a generous reception she got, much more than my friend Coleman Hughes got. Because that's what I was thinking of the way that Sonny Hostin attacked my friend Coleman. She didn't get any of that. She got some pushback here and there. But it was so lovely that at the end of this, they said, you should just become a Democrat. Well, yeah. I wanted to put up a tweet. This is a funny one. This is a tweet that I saw from Cat Turd. This is the stupidity of our politics. This guy has millions of followers. He's been interviewed by Tucker Carlson. He's some guy in a cowboy hat named Cat Turd. He's actually Cat Turd 2, because apparently the original Cat Turd, not as popular, but couldn't get his Cat Turd 2. Lol, her transition to who? Liz Cheney is complete. This is why people are liking MTG now, is that people on the MAGA side, because she's criticizing the president very softly, I would say, wink, wink, that it's a bit harsher in private maybe than it is in public. But her turn towards being Liz Cheney, a rhino, a Republican in name only, is complete. Well, I'm not so convinced of that, but this is this infighting on the right. And I know we probably have some people that want to talk about this. Somebody has a hand up. But the interesting thing about this now is that you saw today Senator Kennedy from Louisiana being chased down by CNN. And he said, what did he say? The opposite of what Marjorie Taylor Greene said on the Bill Maher show with me. We talked about it afterwards, too. The filibuster. We have to end the shutdown by using the nuclear option and getting rid of the filibuster. Republicans don't want to do this. No one has ever wanted to do this. John Thune has said he doesn't want to do this. And why? Well, look, that 60 vote advantage makes, life a little more pleasant in the Senate. And if 51 votes is all it takes, wait until you lose the Senate and look what happens. DC will be a state. What kind of state will DC be? DC votes like Syria did for Assad, 95% for Democrats. You want that, Republicans? That's what Republicans are saying now. Do we want this? But Kennedy said today, I talked to the president. It was aggressive. We had a back and forth, and we disagreed. But I told him, our body in my lifetime and in your lifetime, to the CNN court, I think it was Manu Raj, but that guy, he was a young guy, in your lifetime, we'll never get rid of the filibuster. So guess what, people? Is it MTG? Yep. Is it mainstream people in the Senate that are sticking up to Trump? A brief aside, by the way, I didn't have time to say this on the show. Bill kind of implied that there's a certain amount of bravery that it takes to stand up to Donald Trump. There is truth to that, but not in this example. And why? Well, my friend Peter Maher is a Republican congressman for one term from Michigan, heir to the Myers grocery store fortune. He doesn't give a shit. He doesn't need the job. He went into Congress, January 6th happened. He voted to impeach. And Trump attacked him and then primaried him. And the Democrats funded his super MAGA Republican primary opponent. The guy won, worked out for Dems because he won. Got rid of Peter Maher. And then he lost the general because he was crazy. So great play by the Dems to do this, but the people who are worried about MAGA and fascism are funding just for political expediency. But that can happen to Peter. Marjorie Taylor Greene is too popular. She's now a famous person. She can't walk down the street in LA. How many members of Congress are there? 435. How many, my dear listeners, my dear people out there in two-way land, people that are on this Zoom call, how many people can name 10 congressmen? Well, I suspect you guys can because you're nerds like me. But 10 is a lot for 435. But you can name Marjorie Taylor Greene. She can attack, and it doesn't matter. Donald Trump can get mad at her. Doesn't matter, right? So that is where we are in the party. There's all these fissures and all these fractures. We have Don Calloway coming on in a second, so I don't have time to get as deep as I wanted to into some of this stuff, particularly, you know, the filibuster stuff, the Nick Fuentes stuff, this civil war on the right, which is, in my mind, absolutely necessary to purge the party of these really horrible, disgusting people. Ben Shapiro had, someone sent this to me, had an episode the other day when he went after these people, Tucker Carlson, Nick Fuentes, not Fuentes, but you've known these people. I've known Tucker Carlson for years. Tucker Carlson tried to hire me. I was always in a good, nice relationship with him. And, you give people that you know a little bit of slack, right? But Ben Shapiro didn't do that. And he did an episode that was mostly tape, mostly sots, as we say, of Nick Fuentes and Tucker Carlson, the things that they have been saying. And it was only in that moment when I realized that, wow, this is exceptionally bad when you hear them all strung together in the madness that has gripped a certain precinct of not the Republican Party, of conservatism. So that is happening. But on the other side, Democrats are feeling it too, right? Marjorie Taylor Greene made a good point. And I said at the beginning of the show on Bill Maher show, I couldn't believe I was immediately agreeing with Marjorie Taylor Greene. What is the government shutdown? It's the holdout on the extension of Obamacare tax credits that started during the pandemic, right? And they're extended again. And that's what this is all over, those things. You're not going to get SNAP when the judge intervenes. We'll see what happens, because no one can agree on these two things. So Marjorie Taylor Greene says something that I think is correct. The Republicans do not have a plan. They don't. She's right, they don't. There is no plan. Oh, free market, this, that. But what is the plan to reduce costs? Because even if you take away those credits for people who don't make a ton of money and rely on Obamacare tax credits, and you have a bozo like me who pays an absolutely insane amount out of pocket, like you wouldn't believe it. Can I tell you what it is? You won't believe it. Oh, Michael, you have an incredibly good plan. I do. And the reason I have a good, quote unquote, plan is because I'm a type 1 diabetic and my costs to survive are astonishingly high. If you take what my employer pays and what I pay and you put them together, what is my plan a month for 2 people? My daughter is not even on my plan. She's on a better plan. We worked that one out. It's not like I'm leaving her out to grift and start a podcast and try to pay for her own bills. Come on. The monthly cost for 2 people, someone in the chat said $2,400. It's a little more than what I pay. It's $5,000 for 2 people. You don't believe me? I promise you, I can put the screenshots. The Maher people, by the way, the bookers, they do the pre-interview, didn't believe me. And I sent a screenshot and I said, here you go, $5,000. $5,000. What is that? 60 grand a year? Yeah, but Michael, you live in New York State. No, I understand. I'm not asking for sympathy. But I am saying that people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, economic populists, I am not an economic populist. I'm the opposite of that. But do they have a point, and do they have a place from which to make an argument? Of course they do. Of course they do. And who is countering that in the right? Nobody. I mean, Marjorie Taylor Greene can write a bill. I don't think she's doing much, but as politics, she's not wrong. She's not wrong at all. So that is a problem for the left and the right. And on the left, Zohran Mamdani is a problem. It's a problem for them. I'm not saying he's a problem for New York City. I think he's a problem for New York City too. But I just want to say on a purely political basis, right? Because the number of people who see this happen and see the success of Mamdani and say, you know what, this is the future of our party, would make an enormous mistake to do so. I saw a headline, and people in the chat and people out there can tell me if I'm right or wrong in the way that I read this. I tried to do a quick read of it. It's Hakeem Jeffries. I think he said he didn't endorse oh no, Chuck Schumer, sorry. There was a Jeffries thing too. Chuck Schumer was asked who he voted for, and he wouldn't respond. People took that as something. Maybe it's nothing. But the civil war that you have on the right is also happening on the left. and it's going to happen on the left. And I'll give you a quick example before we bring Don Calloway on. I want to play two clips. One of them is of Gavin Newsom. I mean, Gavin Newsom is the guy who we suspect, will make a run for the presidency. We know he's going to make a run for the presidency. And he's certainly been acting like it. He said this in a BBC interview, and I believe this was in March or May, when the interviewer asked him why the Dems lost. Why did they lose so badly? Why did you lose to Donald Trump on all these felonies and blah, blah, blah? This is how Gavin Newsom responded.
The beginning of the time you've kindly given us, you did say that maybe the Dems were too woke. In what way? What did you mean when you told me that at the beginning?
There were a lot of theories, including the issues around social policy and DEI and CRT, a lot of three-letter words that were weaponized by the right with respect, and the issues, obviously, of gender issues related to trans sports and surgeries that were highlighted in the campaign. And so I think we just, in order to have a real understanding, an honest understanding of what happened.
Well, he figured out what happened, apparently. This is Gavin Newsom a couple weeks ago on a podcast, and this is October. This is what, a handful of 6 months later. This is what he said the other day.
60s world. You got the Supreme Court talking about getting rid of the Voting Rights Act, and that's very real.
Yeah.
That may likely happen in just a matter of months. I mean, they're rewriting history, censoring historical facts. It's a unbelievable moment. All this anti-woke stuff is just anti-black. Period, full stop. All the CRT, ESG, DEI stuff, that's all this is. It's this great purge, and it's happening in real time. And I'm sitting here, and I feel like, luckily I'm governor, but like we're not doing enough. Right. We're not calling this out. We're not drawing a line here. And again, it's not about Democrats or Republicans. It's about who we
right and wrong,
man. Yeah,
right,
it's right and goddamn wrong. Daylight and darkness.
I feel
Seem like two different statements to me. If you are anti-woke, you are anti-black. I can assure the governor that that is not true. I'm sure there are some people out there who say they're anti-woke, like Nick Fuentes, who is also anti-black. He's anti-Jewish, he's anti-Indian, he's anti a lot of things. But you have a guy who said, well, this is the autopsy we need to do. Is this what hurt us? And then on a podcast, the different audience, he says, to be anti-woke is to be anti-black. The reason I play that clip is, with the sort of Mamdani election, with a bunch of other things that I can mention, we'll just keep it there. I mean, AOC Town Hall said something very similar on CNN. Have Democrats learned any lessons from that? Because from my perspective, is that there is a huge lesson to be learned. But I want to talk to Don Calloway. Do we have Don with us? Yeah, Don's not here yet. Well, that's fine by me for another minute, because we can keep going on this. Because what you end up having here is that Mamdani is a purveyor of identity politics too, in that fashion, not in the sense of like, oh, we need representation. That's sort of the way Democrats did it in the 1990s or something. But this modern version, and when you have AOC's asked something very similar, they asked Bernie Sanders, right, in this town hall at CNN. And Bernie Sanders goes on about class politics, because that's what Bernie Sanders does. Bernie Sanders is of a different generation. Bernie Sanders used to be somebody who was pretty pro Second Amendment, by the way. He used to say, we got a lot of guns in Vermont, not a lot of killing. And he would say, okay, that's fine. And he was very anti-immigration, because he said it drove working class wages down. But he's moderated for a number of reasons and kind of fit into that modern 2020 kind of George Floyd era of the party. But when he was asked about this, he had not much to say. AOC responded by saying that, the people on the right, they dehumanize LGBT people, they hate women and all this stuff. And if she is going to be somebody who is also going to be a potential nominee for the Dems in 2028? God, how old am I? This is insane. Has it really gotten that far? In 2028, are you going to have somebody, the centrist Dem, the guy who had Charlie Kirk on his podcast? He had Charlie Kirk on his podcast. He went on Steve Bannon's show. Give the man credit for that. I think that he's a a kind of absurd figure as a politician and just like a paint by numbers one. Looks like he was made by AI of like what a Democratic candidate used to be. Whereas, you have the old grumpy Jewish socialist from Brooklyn who still has a Brooklyn accent despite living in Vermont for 300 years. And AOC, this kind of young, very radical for the party upstart. And these two things together, and then on the other side, when they're both going the same direction on identity politics, look, Godspeed to you, Dems. But I'm going to assure you that that is a losing formula on a national level. What happens tonight in New York City? Zohran Mamdani is going to win, right? It would be a miracle. I would do a January 6th on Gracie Mansion if he lost, because I'd be like, something's up. So there must be some sort of Venezuelan ballots that are printed on bamboo paper that you can trace back to China. All those crazy conspiracy theories, because it seems so certain to me. I mean, there was some narrowing of polls, and just as a side note to point out that Cuomo does not deserve to win. Right? This is what politics is. It's not about who you want to win. It is that, of course, but it's also about who deserves to win, who runs a good campaign. This is one of the worst campaigns I've seen in my life. I mean, he's never run a significant campaign if you look back and all of the exogenous factors that made him in the position that he was in. You understand that it's not because he ran great campaigns and he's a magnetic politician. All right. If we don't have Don, do we want to talk to Bobby? Bobby has his hand up. Bobby doesn't. Bobby, you're muted, but we'll unmute you, or you'll unmute yourself. How's it going, buddy? He's still muted. We'll never get this mute thing. There we go, Bobby. We're good.
I think we're set.
Perfect. We're good.
Michael, so if I recall correctly, you are a UMass Amherst
I am indeed.
alum. Okay, so maybe you'll remember a certain Robert Wolf.
Richard, you mean Richard Wolff?
Is it Richard Wolff, the defensive anarchism?
Yeah, the economist. Yeah.
Okay, so
yeah,
it was an interesting essay he penned. I think it was in the 70s, and I remember reading it in college, kind of in one of these political science, political theory classes. And one of the points that he made, maybe in a roundabout way, was because the state imposed some kind of, strictures on the individual. The state was never in itself a moral authority. And the closer we got to direct democracy, the better everyone was. And he kind of invented this way where everyone would get home from work and log on to these computers and vote, and that would be the way that we would govern. I remember there was another political philosopher, Harry Frankfurt, who kind of rebuffed
on
some
bullshit
of the
guy, right? Yeah.
Yes, precisely. Some of the wilder ideas that Wolf had used to kind of construct this odd edifice, but it was nice to see that it wasn't something that could happen just practically, because we didn't have the technology at the time. Everyone thought it was kind of an interesting intellectual exercise and left it at that.
Yeah.
Now, moreover, we had this finding that for years in political science was kind of one of the bedrocks of research, and that was that the youth was just kind of largely disinterested, right? You had various student movements at times, but people didn't really care and get out and vote.
Yeah.
This year, we've got this election in New York particularly, which seems to be something that's galvanized a vast proportion of Gen Z, millennials,
Yeah.
Gen X, obviously, and the more the older age groups obviously haven't been as affected by this swarm of enthusiasm, this wave of excitement. And so I wonder, how do we balance the fact that there's this intrinsic good that we see as political participation, with the fact that so much of the political participation, once it starts to encompass like a large part of the bell curve that maybe isn't very critical, is susceptible to demagoguery and kind of, oh, we'll have free grocery stores, don't worry about it. And everyone goes, yes, let's do it.
Well, people
What's the solve?
Bobby, people like free stuff. They like being promised free stuff. The question that I had for John Lovett the other day, the Pod Save America guy, was, what happens on both ends of this, on the Republican and the Democratic end, when prices are not going to come down? If you freeze rents, the prices will go up. I mean, we know that. I mean, there's the places that have had rent stabilization and rent control, specifically rent control, have been places like Cambridge, Massachusetts, very lefty, Berkeley, California. The places they've all gotten rid of them. In the number of units in New York that are already under some sort of rent control is astonishingly high. People don't realize how high it is. And
30-40%, something.
It's about 40%.
Yeah.
You're right. It's about, rent stabilization and all sorts of things like this, which nobody does the math and says, does that have anything to do on top of regulation and building regulations? And, the abundance Democrats, by the way, when you say to these people, not John Lovett, but to so many of these people in the Zohran world, Ezra Klein is their Nick Fuentes. He is the most, they absolutely hate this person so much because of the kind of practical, hey, maybe if we loosened up regulations and people build more units, we'll bring housing costs down, et cetera. But it's really funny, these people that you're talking about, that are getting out to vote now, they're the highly educated, upper middle class people of New York. And they're saying, only way you can live in New York City is if you're a highly educated, upper middle class New Yorker, and they're the ones that are all out there voting for their own obsolescence, which I think is very funny, because those are the people that are motivated to vote, right? I mean, do you think that the Bronx, like a precinct in the Bronx, is going to have that penetration of early voting and queues that Park Slope has around the corner from the Park Slope Food Co-op, who probably just left the Park Slope Food Co-op voting on a resolution about Israel as they're stalking?
Well, there's no virtuous cachet, right? You don't get anything by doing so in so many neighborhoods. But you certainly do in Park Slope, right?
In Park
You
Slope,
get a gold star.
But so you have these, like, I am not one of these people that thinks political participation is virtuous. The more I interact with voters, I think it's a horrible defect of democracy is that we have to allow these people. I don't want to be Australia where, you have to vote, because
Right.
I got booed. This is great. I love getting booed. I was booed at a thing that I did last year before the election when somebody in the crowd, this is here in New York City, and I was the kind of middle guy, Josh Hammer, the conservative guy on my right, and the woman from the Washington Post, Rampel, who's a really nice person, I think she works at the Bulwark now. But I said, hey, I'm not going to vote. And it was a gasp in the room. And I had to explain to them, not voting is a choice. If you have two terrible candidates in a local election, nobody comes out because they're not inspired by them, that tells you something. It doesn't tell you merely the apathy of the people who just don't get involved. No, sometimes people don't vote because they do get involved. And what is my option here? What would my option be? Curtis Sliwa, who I think is funny, Andrew Cuomo, who I think is the worst. And I said, oh, I'd vote for him. But I was, after a while, after he didn't show up for the fifth column, I said, absolutely no.
Cardinal sin. That was the last straw.
Yeah, totally personal. I have like 3. If you don't show up, it's gonna be bad for you. You're listening, Don Calloway. Is Don here? But yeah, this kind of thing. But also I've had a lot of conversations with people about political extremism, amongst young people. I was sitting across from a guy at a friend's family do. It was like, it was a big family get together. I was not from the family, but I was sitting across from this young guy. Really smart, I think a freshman at UVA. And he was like talking about Tim Pool and talking about, that was the kind of moderate ones. And I was like, oh, is this guy a groyper? I don't know if he is, but getting that kind of political education when I was 19 at UMass was nearly impossible. You would have to send away for a newsletter from some like survivalist, like I was
The
joking.
John Birch Society.
Like the Ron Paul Survival Report was literally the name of Ron Paul's newsletter in the 90s that was written not necessarily by him, but by a bunch of total libertarian kooks. And I consider myself a libertarian kook, but not of that variety. But getting that information now, you can talk about algorithms and China and TikTok, et cetera. But the access to dumb information is so readily accessible that the job of a fact checker, remember we thought that was going to stop Trump? Fact checking. We're going to fact check
For
them.
a while. Yeah, the Pinocchios, of
Yeah,
course.
Pinocchio.
Thank you.
And what
We
did we
solved it.
We solved it. We have the smart people that nobody fucking trusts to begin with. And then COVID happens and then no one trusts them at all. It's like, oh my God, they lied to us about this, that, and the other. I think some of that is true. I think some of it's overdrawn. I think some of it is just people were confused in the middle of a pandemic. I give them a little bit of credit. But all of these media failures over time not only means that those things aren't going to work, right? And it's going to motivate people to come out to the polls. It also suggests that there's a rot in institutions, right? And also suggests to me that nobody cares about the truth. People think everyone's become a postmodernist. And like, what is true? What is true anyway? There is no truth. Of course there is truth.
Truth for me versus truth for you.
Correct.
Etc. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's the idea of like, okay, the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941. Why? Well, we don't know. That's a debate. One is a fact, one is true. I suppose we could probably find people who would debate that even now. But there's people who lament the decline in truth in politics. It's always been that way. But there is just a greater access for people to, reach out and, handle these bullshit untruths that make them feel good about themselves, right? Make them feel good about their lot in life. Why is this happening to me? There's some exogenous factor, again, that is doing it to me. And the internet is full of those things. So when I started the show talking about Marjorie Taylor Greene, I saw a clip of her because I was doing my background, but then the entire episode was about the fucking shutdown. So it was like, I have all my background on Marjorie Taylor Greene. And there was one where she was talking to that dimwit, Benny Johnson. And she says at some point that there were new documents released by Javier Milei and in Argentina. And by the way, good for MTG for speaking out against the Trump bailout of Argentina, giving $40 billion to the Argentinians. We should not be doing that. But she said, they released all these documents and it turns out that Hitler survived and ended up spending like 20, 30 years in Argentina. That's not what those documents said at all. But
this is the Tupac Lives interpretation of all of his lyrics after the fact. Yeah.
Imagine the Tupac people getting interested in politics. What do you think they're going to do? They're going to be like, oh my goodness, the conspiracy of this and the APAC and, my thing to her about that, and it didn't come up. I was mad at Bill for not bringing it up. Is her obsession with APAC. And it's like, you're denouncing healthcare costs. Why don't you spend a little time on healthcare lobbyists as opposed to the, Americans who like Israel? It's like the infection that has happened to so many people is, I think, and Marjorie Taylor Greene is exactly what I'm talking about. I'm also talking about people who are voting in Park Slope who don't really know a lot about politics. She also doesn't know a ton about politics, but she's an elected representative. So
how do we get away from this politics as a spectator sport? Because on one hand, like, I'm part of this, right? So are you, so is everybody that's, tuning in and refreshing the page for the election. Yeah. But on the other hand, man, I don't think it's healthy for everyone to start rooting and cheering and going to the bar with their jersey on.
No, I think I think one of the great examples of this, Democrats have not really experienced this in a way that Republicans have. Had Bernie Sanders won in 2016, more likely then than it would have been in 2020, maybe we would have seen a version of it, because I don't think there's an ideology that's exempt from this stuff. I think everyone is susceptible to it. I don't think it's a right-wing issue. But notice on the right, the number of people, and this goes both ways on the right, by the way, I'll give you two examples. The number of free traders I interviewed Art Laffer for a documentary that I did in 2018 or something. And it was one of the funniest, because Art Laffer is one of just the most entertaining guys in the world. He's the guy behind the Laffer curve. He's like the most free market economist of all time. He's the guy that George Bush Sr. was talking about when he said voodoo economics. This is the guy, right? And he's a ardent free trader. He's like a Hayekian. And he is giving me this bullshit about how Donald Trump's great on trade. And no, I think he's right on all this stuff. And I like, Art, come on. And he's like, and you can see the grin in his face. And it's like, it's tribal, guys. Come on. This is our tribe now. And then you have another version on the right in the other direction. Who said recently, it's a quiz for you people out there, what former conservative neocon said that he would cast a vote for Zohran Mamdani? Anyone? People out there probably know. Bill Kristol, the bulwark Bill Kristol, the man who wrote a book saying, you know, whose father was Irving Kristol, whose father was a famous left-winger, who became a conservative. He was the neocon, the conservative, you know, the liberal who'd been mugged by reality, as they said. And so I guess it's just full circle with his dad, going back to where his dad began. But when Bill Kristol says, oh, we have to protect abortion rights, you know, LGBTQ rights, the Trump administration is going after, it's like, you're in your 70s, dude. How did you have 60 years? You put out the Weekly Standard from what, 1995 to like 2018 or something? Do you know how many issues of that magazine? It was a weekly, I think, yes, Weekly Standard, of course, a weekly magazine. It might have become bi-weekly at some point. But when you have a track record for so long, how do you change your mind so quickly on every issue if it's not tribal, if it's not personal? If you are looking at this and I said, oh my God, I was wrong on the Second Amendment, I was wrong on abortion, you can be wrong on a few things and change, but you have to have, you know, an anvil from a cartoon fall on your head to have you change every single issue, because that's somebody who doesn't believe in anything. They believe in the politics of the tribe. They hate the tribe of Donald Trump so much that they will. And so I am actually kind of amused by the Marjorie Taylor Greene thing, to see her get a nice reception at The View, see her get a nice reception on Real Time with Bill Maher. And I had a seat right next to her watching it happen in real time. There was something a bit, you know, she doesn't need to do this. The MAGA stuff, the more MAGA she is, the more clicks she gets. She might say, look, I'm famous enough at this point. She's making a lot of money. I mean, her stocks are doing really well, right? People are criticizing her for this. Maybe she's just doing it because she believes it, because she's learning in real time. And what she's finding out is maybe Cat Turd 2 and Joy Behar are right. Maybe she is a liberal. Maybe she's a Christian, like a very hardcore Christian. At the end of the show, in the overtime segment, she said, maybe the aliens, because there's an alien guy on who did a documentary about this. Maybe they're not. Maybe they're falling angels. And Bill,
I appreciated the brevity of your response to Maher on this question. Yeah, there wasn't much else to say there.
No. What you have to say, as Christopher Hitchens said, borrowing from Carl Sagan borrowing from somebody else. Extraordinary claims demand extraordinary evidence. Come on, people, let's not be silly about this. But when you see a lot of this stuff, when you see a lot of these turns, these political turns, I've changed my mind on a ton of stuff. So if somebody dug up something that I wrote in 2002 to, you know, if I was ever had an anvil fall on my head and I said I was going to run for office, explain this, Moynihan. I'd be like, yeah, no, I was young and stupid. That was a really dumb thing that I said. Totally understandable. The slow change is allowed, right? Or the radical change by a radicalizing event. People changed after 9/11. That's liberals became hawks, became neocons, et cetera. Some of them went back. I actually got a book, a galley copy, totally forgotten about guy, by the way, of a great old writer named Ron Rosenbaum. And I said to a friend of mine, do you remember after 9/11 where Ron Rosenbaum joined Pajamas Media and was blogging about the Islamist threat and all this stuff? And like, then he was like, oh shit, let me just forget about it. No one remembers it, right? People have those from galvanizing events like 9/11, right? You can change your mind. October 7th, I think, made people in both directions. People really went hard in both directions. I mean, Marjorie Taylor Greene, I checked it out, tweeted on October 7th about how disgusting and horrible the Hamas was and the rest of it. And I think that hers was probably, I think, a very immature response, because she says, look, I see all these dead kids. Like, you know, war is terrible. And I just don't, how do you do that without, I mean, look, you can debate that. I don't want to debate it right now, but those kind of things can change people. But tribal politics is a poison. And always step back, people, if you think, maybe, am I saying this because I believe it? Or am I saying this because the tribe believes it? Because it's good for my podcast. And I think that's what the Fifth Column has done, and I think what this show has done, is not made a ton of friends with people that, we had a big dip after Biden, because when Trump came in office, we were like, guys, ruling by executive fiat, the imperial presidency, bad when he does it, bad when Obama did it, bad when Bush did it. exceptionally bad now because he's breaking all the records. And then the subscribers were like, fuck you. We thought you were on the good side because you were pissing on Biden all the time. It's like, no, we piss on everybody. I mean, the healthiest kind of default state to be in is to not trust your government, and not in a paranoid way, but just assume that they don't have your best interests at heart. I couldn't get, I mean, how many Republicans are going to go out there and say something about what Donald Trump has done by pardoning somebody who directly, very directly, benefits his kids' business. I mean, the level of graft in this is astonishing. And I was out there saying, as people watch this show and watch other shows remember, I was out there saying about the Hunter Biden stuff, this stuff is bad stuff. Why the silence over the children of the current president who are enriching themselves in ways that are quite shocking, to be honest? But Bobby, thank you so much for that. I really appreciate it. It sent me off on a very long jag. But did we get Don Calloway?
And there's Don.
There's Don. We got Don Calloway, CEO and founder of Pine Street Advisors, a Dem. You see him on MSNBC. You see him for a little bit here. We'll go a little longer to get Don. How you doing, buddy? It's good to have you.
My brother. Thank you for having me. Shout out to your team. Listen, I would have been here a lot earlier, but I've been out in the streets trying to observe, at least from what I can, from a man, woman on the street perspective in Virginia. I'm a campaign guy, and you never quite get rid of the bug. So I had to get in the streets and see what was happening in Virginia.
For you, we forgive it. You know why? Because you're on the streets and you can talk about what do you. I mean, I think that I don't want to say it's a foregone conclusion, but if I was a Dem, I'd be pretty confident in the governor's race in Virginia. Tell me what you're seeing out there, and tell me also, the boring question that everybody wants to know is, what does this mean? Is it a harbinger of something for the party, et cetera? I've been making the argument I don't think that is the case at all in New York City. Virginia is slightly different. What do you make of what's going on in your neck of the woods?
Virginia is just such a fascinating election to watch. Of course, it's one of the only ones that is on this kind of odd schedule statewide. The governor can only serve one term, which is one of the defining factors of how you get these kind of churning every 4 years. What I'm seeing is that Abigail Spanberger is likely going to prevail by a substantial margin in the governor's race. Winsome Earl Sears' campaign has stepped its professionalism up probably in the last 2 weeks, but it feels like it's too little too late. She wasn't quite able to establish an identity for herself. I will say that in terms of the national politics of that race, she was a Black woman immigrant running as a Republican, had all the leadership credentials, sitting lieutenant governor and former Marine who retired honorably. But it was fascinating. You just can't leave this out to watch Glenn Youngkin do his job as the party faithful. But the Trump administration did not, the Trump political machine simply did not get behind Winsome Earl Sears, which is not great for their credentials in trying to wipe the racism stench off of the MAGA movement. He endorsed 53 Republicans nationwide in a blanket statement last week, and Winsome Earl Sears was very conspicuously left out of that discussion of who Trump got behind, not only in that blanket endorsement, but throughout the course of her campaign. So I think that's...
Do you think that, I mean, the people within Trump world are obviously reading these polls and like reading the tea leaves of this, and Donald Trump, as you know, in his own, he only likes winners. And there was pretty good sense in a late stage that she was not going to win. And is that more likely that I think that it's great for the MAGA movement if they have a Black female immigrant veteran Republican that they can get behind that's phenomenal for them. But it looked more likely that she was not the candidate to beat Spanberger.
She was not going to win, but Abigail Spanberger was not unbeatable. And frankly, Donald Trump's celebrity could have given Winsome Earl Sears' campaign a substantial boost. If you get behind winners, from what I have seen over the last 10 years, there is no greater king, or in this case, queen maker in the Republican Party than Donald Trump. So we'll never really know what the magnitude of his endorsement would have meant. But I think it merits mention, particularly given the substantial amount of non-conventional Republican votes that the MAGA movement was able to attract just a year ago for the presidency. So I'm not saying that they're racist for not doing it. I'm not trying to jump to that conclusion like I maybe would have when I first started observing this, but I just think it's interesting to note, because it is not a direct opportunity to reach out to those tremendous amount of black voters you got. I do want to address something really quickly. It looks like the Virginia House of Delegates is going to add some Democratic votes and go to about a 55 vote margin. Ongoing Speaker Don Scott says it looks like Jay Jones is maybe not going to be defeated as soundly as we thought. That campaign probably collapsed over the course of the last month, and rightfully so. But over the last week, we saw some Democrats kind of pushing back and saying, hey, we're going to vote for the AG, who is not going to just kowtow to the Trump administration and is going to provide some type of legal block in the federal courts around what the Trump administration wants to do. I'll lastly say, Mike, that I don't know that Virginia is something we should hold up as the national bellwether based upon tonight's results, because ultimately people in Northern Virginia experience the effects of government shutdown and federal furloughs to a more intense effect than people do elsewhere around the country. So it feels to me like those Northern Virginia voters may be reacting to the realities that they're seeing with their actual friends and neighbors, as opposed to this just being a referendum on the overall Trump feeling and sentiment nationwide.
Yeah, look, I think that we always look for these races, and you go back, and are they harbingers of things to come? Are they bellwethers? And so oftentimes they're not. We do have numbers that can suggest to us that Donald Trump's popularity is pretty stagnant, I would say. Like, these are a lot of things, and you can look at these races and how people react to them, but just the overall numbers aren't great. You mentioned, the Trump voters who moved towards, or voters who moved towards Donald Trump, who, I mean, Hispanic men was just astonishing. I mean, I saw that myself in a bunch of reporting I'd done in Texas. Black men specifically, there was a shift there. Black women less so, and not at all, actually. But you look at these numbers, and what does that tell you? Because I've heard you talk about this, Don. I saw you on MSNBC talking about this. That movement to Trump, it's not to Mitt Romney. It's not, it's to Donald Trump, who we were told, we talked about Charlottesville, like he's a racist, but no one really cared when it came to Hispanic men and, black men moving in that direction. And it made Republicans sense that, okay, these are not always going to be Democratic voters. We have an opportunity here. We have to double down on that and bring more people into our coalition, which, by the way, I think is some of the reaction to this Nick Fuentes stuff is like, no, this is not the coalition that we're trying to build. How do you read that now? And do you think that there's, beyond what did it, what made that happen in the first place, how do you suspect it's going to air out in the midterms and, just down the road?
Yeah, well, there's so many factors when you think about what took place a year ago. I think the Democrats ran a shorthanded campaign that was only 107 days, didn't have the opportunity to establish the nominee in the traditional way that typically happens over the course of a 2-year campaign. But if you think about the overall national sentiment, I really do think that Republicans did a good job. And frankly, Americans in popular culture did a good job in messaging the move away from the more politically correct atmosphere that has really gripped a lot of the country over the course of the last 15 years, moving towards a more just general, broader political correctness in culture. And I think we saw a lot of reverb and pushback against that. And that manifests itself electorally in Black and Hispanic men who are really just kind of looking for this centrist or even center-right move back towards a machismo, a Christian masculinity that Donald Trump has always kind of represented. We always have to go into every campaign that he runs remembering that Donald Trump is still one of the most famous people in the world, and he has the one thing that every dollar in any campaign is going to purchase, which is name recognition. So we kind of can't get away from those fundamental truths. And we also have to remember that Black and Hispanic men have been not aliens to the Republican Party over the course of my adult lifetime. I can tell you who the 2 out of 10 members of my deacon board at any given church I've been a member of who were Republicans. I can tell you who my baseball and football coaches were, who were Republicans, the aunties and uncles. We know them, so they're not alien. And I think that the Democratic disadvantage in their that truncated campaign, as well as the kind of move to away from political correctness, really resonated for Republicans. Now, what really we have not seen in year one of the Trump administration is he was able to pull off this magical multiracial, multi-economic coalition that often belongs to Democrats. We have not seen this administration center those people's realistic everyday priorities in the governance. And so the question for 2026 is going to be, do Democrats have the wherewithal, the money, and the message to show people that, hey, yeah, he got you to vote for him, but he hasn't included you in the actual governance over the course of these 2 years, 2 years by next year, to determine whether or not they will be able to keep together that multiracial coalition. But it will be very, very difficult for Democrats to do that because they're simply not raising the money to fight in a lot of these contested House races.
If I pick up my phone, I'm going to run a campaign, and I say, I got to call Pine Street Advisors. I heard him on Moynihan, and I got to call this guy. And I say, well, you know what I heard him say on that is that, that economic populism in some sense, I think that economic populism is not the exact right thing. The way Trump does it, I think Mamdani is doing it that way. But if I call you and I'm going to run a race, I say, look, Don, you're talking about these economic issues, these bread and butter issues. Look at Mamdani in New York. He's talking about free buses and freezing the rent. And maybe that is the way the party should go. Maybe leave out some of the democratic socialist stuff where, they're cheering for Hamas or something. But if you take away that stuff in some of the more extreme identity politics, that is the way to go for the Democratic Party, is to be more economically populist, not the Democratic Party of the 1990s and of Bill Clinton, which was, what people derisively call, I don't like the phrase, but they derisively call neoliberalism, this sort of, capitalism and the market will lift us all up. I think myself personally, that is a much better way of doing things. But what would you say to somebody who said, that's the way the winds are blowing, all of us Dems should go in that direction too?
Well, I would say that New York City is an extraordinarily unique beast. There's no place like it in the world, and we can't make the mistake as institutional Democrats. Yes, even Zohran Mamdani after tonight is fundamentally an institutional Democrat. You can't make the mistake of thinking that you can transmogrify the unique alchemy of New York City politics to anywhere else in the world as a blueprint for Democratic Party messaging. I do think Zohran Mamdani is uniquely an extraordinary figure in the history of our politics because he is the literal manifestation of the idea, not a linear line with Dems on one side and Republicans on the other side, but it is more of a circular spectrum to where at their fundamental core, the Bernie voter and the Trump voter are a lot more similar on this circular spectrum than anybody ever has really believed. And that's why I think Zohran Mamdani resonates with a lot of people, regardless of how the economic realities of paying for buses looks, or regardless of how the economic realities of city-owned grocery stores look. He resonates with a lot of people because he's standing for something. And he does have, whether or not we agree with his politics, he does have charisma. He has an excellent digital presence, and he has the audacity to stand for some principles. And I think that that's where that is a very complicated alchemy, but I think the best single word we have to describe it right now is populism. And when you find a charismatic and capable messenger for a true populist narrative, that person is probably going to be a threat to Democratic and Republican institutional circles. But that doesn't necessarily mean that that strategy is a way to go out and win House District 2 in Iowa or House District 3 in Canada, where the Democratic Party has to win in order to retain the House, to get the House back in 2026.
But Don Calloway, you're from Missouri, aren't you? You're a Missouri man.
When I'm in St. Louis, I'm from Missouri. When I'm out of St. Louis, I'm from Missouri.
Yeah, you're not from Kansas City. That's different. That's the other side. Definitely not KCK. That's a different.
But if you're in KC, you're also in Missouri. Now, when you get out of Jeff City and all points between, you're in Missouri.
Yeah, that's Missouri out there. Yeah. You're a Missouri man. One of your senators, Josh Hawley, sounds like Zohran Mamdani on economics. So apparently, in the heartland of America, Josh Hawley, the Republican, can go against his party and sound like Bernie Sanders about 90% of the time when he's talking about economics. So I wonder if when you see examples like that, Marjorie Taylor Greene, who we were talking about earlier, from a district in Georgia, that this kind of economic populism, I don't think is the greatest thing for this country, and I don't think that no one really cares. To your point, by the way, no one cares about how stuff is going to be paid for, because what you said is right. I've talked to a million people. The great thing about Mamdani, they tell me, is he's talking about affordability. No one goes the extra. He's going to solve affordability. They're not that silly. They think there's going to be an uphill battle, but he's talking about it. That as the politics. My worry about that stuff, and I wonder if you think the same thing or have considered this in any way, is that when that stuff fails, because free buses are. And by the way, I live in New York City. The buses are free now anyway. No one pays for them. It's like they say 50% of people don't pay for the buses. So now it'll be 100%. Great.
Right.
But paying for that stuff, raising taxes on the city tax, we have a the federal tax we pay, we have the state tax, we also have a city tax too, and that will be going up. And if people flee from that, my thing is that my worry about this stuff is when you promise people these, Donald Trump has done this with factories, tariffs. We're going to have all this manufacturing. Wherever, if you're in the middle of Missouri and you lost a factory to automation to Mexico, it's coming back. When they don't come back, but the goods are more expensive because of tariffs, or when your taxes are more expensive, but apartments are still expensive, then people are put off on politics and they're put off on these easy solutions, because there's a point at which we're going to say, well, does this stuff work? I mean, that's going to be a bomb waiting for both Republicans and Democrats in the future.
Well,
I'm cynical, Don. I'm sorry.
No, don't be cynical at all. I mean, so I can talk, as you can tell, and I think that part of why it takes so long to respond, Trace is laughing. Part of why it takes so long to respond is because I don't have the privilege of detaching our current situation from history.
Sure.
If you look at the people throughout the history of the Republic who have presented the greatest threat to the existing system, and frankly have paid the ultimate price for that threat in many respects, I'm talking about John Brown in Kansas, right? I'm talking about Fred Hampton in Chicago in 1969. These were the people who fundamentally represented the notion of a cross-racial, cross-gender understanding that, hey, there are real economic populism issues in which the middle class is getting compressed and wealth is being consolidated, and all of us are being screwed. What I'm trying to say is that the major hurdle to a broader populist thought taking hold in this country is not explaining the costs and explaining the economics and the actual kitchen table of how to pay for some of these ideas that we think are actually reasonable, or that we, if not utopian. The broader issue is convincing this country to get past the demographic, let's be honest, racial divisions that we have, right? And some people have gotten toward it at different spaces. Some people say Dr. King was starting to get toward those spaces with the Memphis Sanitation Rights March, from which he was immediately killed afterwards. But my point is here that Zohran Mamdani represents a message that could very easily play well in mid-Missouri, where I'm from, right? In Tebbets, Missouri, my favorite karaoke bar in the world. In Rolla, Missouri, where Josh Hawley is seeing people feel real pain of SNAP benefits, right? Missouri has some of the poorest towns in the country, right down there with Alabama, Mississippi, and some other more Rust Belt poverty in this country. And Josh sees his constituents feeling real pain of SNAP benefits going, of healthcare premiums doubling. The barrier to a Zohran Mamdani's message or a broader economic populism message really resonating is the racial differences. We in mid-Missouri are not prepared to hear that from a Muslim from New York City. We are not prepared to hear it from so many other people, because let's just be honest about it. One of the fundamental operating and animating principles of our politic of the last 50 years has been maintaining racial animus between groups, right? So I'm not prepared to hear something that even I may feel good about in my soul, or even might represent my best interest, like Obamacare, right? Or like a public option. I'm not prepared to hear that if it's coming from, somebody who's ostensibly looks and feels much different than me. I will close with this. I'm as liberal as you can get, and Josh Hawley and I have been personally friends for 20 years. We practiced law together as baby lawyers, and he is extremely thoughtful and smart. But I am very encouraged by him seeing the actual pain around Missouri kitchen tables and wanting to speak up in a way that benefits those folks, even if it's not the most popular institutional Republican position at the moment.
Yeah, I think that shakeup in politics, that ideological shakeup, is going to be fascinating for years to come. And the reason that I brought up, what you said earlier and what you'd said, I think I heard you say it on MSNBC, about the kind of racial demographics of the Trump coalition in the last election, is that I think we're starting to have people understand, particularly people who are so far outside of communities like Black communities in the city, Hispanic communities in the city, South Asian here in Queens, who will come out big for Mamdani, in thinking that there is one way of talking to those people, and that there is one version of that person. I mean, you talk about King before he was assassinated. I mean, King was a social democrat. I mean, he was very open about his kind of social, not socialist, leaning social democratic policies. And then you have all these people in the same coalition. Bayard Rustin, a great example of this, was not a social democrat. He had elements of it and he moved away from it because people have their own interests. Their communities look different to them than people in their own communities look to them. In this fundamental misunderstanding of politics, of saying that Hispanic people will always vote for Democrats because we're the good guys in this. Nope, that's not always going to happen. So this shakeup of demographics, of the way that politics is done in this country will be fascinating, and we'll have Don Calloway, I hope, in the future to talk about it. But we're going to say one thing before we go, is that Fox News apparently just called Virginia for Spanberger. So a celebration over in the Calloway residence this evening. I don't know if you drink, Don, but are you gonna crack some?
St.
There we go. He's a St. Louis guy. He will not. It's a Union beer, right? It's like you support those guys.
That's right. All day, all day. Shout out to my Union Brewers out there, man. Listen, this was great. I could go all day. Back, man. Let's do this again.
We'll have you back when there's not an election so we can talk about what just happened. I'll have you the whole hour. Don Calloway, CEO and founder of Pine Street Advisors, political guru. I see him on TV. So you see him on TV, you'll see him here. And for the rest of you, what's today? Tuesday. We'll be back on Thursday at 7 p.m. Go over to @the Moynihan Report on YouTube and subscribe and do all that stuff. And we will see you again in 2 days. It's going to be just as good as it was today, I promise you.